For 35 years, his wife believed he didn't just get lost, he was silenced. The proof was waiting inside a single rock he left behind, a message from the dead that would expose a decades-old lie. Stay with me, because what that rock revealed proves that sometimes the Earth itself is the most important witness. Some mysteries do not scream, they whisper. They settle into the bedrock of a place, becoming as much a part of the landscape as the ancient stones and silent trees. And sometimes those whispers travel forward through time, waiting for someone with the right tools to finally hear them. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Join our community of seekers, and let's make sure no name stays forgotten. In Stone Creek, Colorado, the silence began on a cold October morning in 1988. Dr. Alistair Finch, a man who read the Earth's history in layers of rock and sediment, walked into the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Blackwood Shale Formation and never walked out. He was 42 years old, a seasoned geologist whose love for the wild was matched only by his meticulous caution. There was no distress call from his radio, no sign of a struggle, no trace of the man who knew the treacherous terrain better than his own reflection. His truck was found parked at the trailhead, a half-empty thermos of coffee on the passenger seat, still lukewarm. For 35 years, his story was a cautionary tale told to outsiders, a ghost story whispered by the wind that swept down from the high peaks. The official file gathered dust in the county sheriff's office, its conclusions simple and stark. A tragic accident, a man lost to the elements he so deeply respected. The wilderness gives, and the wilderness takes away. The case faded from headlines, then from conversation, until it became just another piece of local lore, the mystery of the mapmaker, who was swallowed by his own map. But the Earth is patient. It holds its secrets tightly, but it does not keep them forever. It has a memory far longer than our own. And that memory, that long-buried truth, often surfaces not with a roar, but with a quiet click in a sterile lab decades later. In 2023, a university student running a routine analysis on one of Alistair Finch's forgotten rock samples will uncover a secret not of geology, but of chemistry. She will find an impossible compound that has no place in nature, a synthetic signature that proves Alistair Finch didn't just get lost. He found something he was never meant to see. This is the story of how a voice, silenced for over 3 decades, finally spoke from beyond the grave, using the only language he had left, the language of stone. It's a story about how the quietest whispers can become the loudest truths, and how sometimes the most important evidence isn't found in a fingerprint or a footprint, but in the very ground beneath our feet. Stay with me, because what that rock reveals will prove that Alistair Finch wasn't a victim of nature. He was a witness to a crime so vast it was hidden in plain sight, a crime the size of a mountain. And the people who silenced him made one critical mistake. They forgot that the Earth always gives back what it takes. To understand how Alistair Finch vanished, you must first understand what he was searching for. He wasn't just a geologist. He was a cartographer of deep time. A man obsessed with geologic anomalies, the kind of subtle inconsistencies that most of his colleagues dismissed as statistical noise. His wife, Elena, a quiet but fiercely intelligent librarian, called them his echoes, faint signals from the Earth's past that only he seemed to hear. He believed that the Earth didn't just have a history, it had a memory. And sometimes that memory was a scar. In the months leading up to his disappearance, he was consumed by one such echo in the Blackwood Shale, a vast, desolate formation that most other geologists considered barren and uninteresting. But Alistair saw something different. He spoke of unusual water tables that defied the region's rainfall patterns, of strange magnetic readings that flickered on his magnetometer like a nervous heartbeat. He told Elena that the shale felt wrong, that it was too silent, too still. He was a man who could feel the deep, slow pulse of the planet, and here, in this empty stretch of Colorado wilderness, the pulse was gone. His final entry in his home journal, dated the night before he left, is cryptic and haunting. The handwriting is rushed, more frenetic than his usual calm script. It reads, "The stratigraphy is wrong. It's like a page was torn out of the book and replaced with a forgery. Following the water tomorrow. I think the echo is a warning. Every word carries the weight of a man standing on the edge of a terrifying discovery. A forgery. Not a natural anomaly, but a deliberate deception. A warning." He knew he was walking toward danger, but his curiosity was a force stronger than fear. On the morning of October 12, 1988, he packed his rucksack with the meticulous care of a man preparing for a sacred mission. His well-worn rock hammer, his brass compass, a dozen empty sample bags, and a thermos of strong black coffee, brewed just the way he liked it. He kissed Elena goodbye at dawn, the sky a bruised purple over the mountains. She remembered the scratch of his beard and the cool, earthy scent of his jacket. His last words to her were not a promise to be careful, but a statement of unshakable purpose, the kind of sentence that would echo in her memory for the next 35 years. He looked out at the silent peaks and said, "I think I'm about to find out why this place feels so quiet." He was right. He would find the answer. He just wouldn't be able to tell anyone what it was. The search was immense, immediate, and utterly fruitless. Helicopters chopped through the thin mountain air, their pilots seeing nothing but an endless, indifferent tapestry of gray rock and dark green pine. On the ground, search and rescue teams, aided by cadaver dogs, scoured every inch of the Blackwood Shale. They found no broken equipment, no footprints that didn't belong to them, not even a discarded food wrapper. It was as if the earth had opened its mouth and swallowed Alistair Finch whole, leaving no trace of his passing. The case file grew thick with maps of grids that had been meticulously covered, but remained chillingly thin on actual evidence. The trail was not cold, it was non-existent. After 2 agonizing years, the search was officially called off. Alistair Finch was declared legally dead, his name etched onto a cold stone of bureaucratic finality. For his wife, Elena, the world didn't end. It simply froze. Grief is not a single event, but a landscape you must learn to live in. Their small home became a museum of a life interrupted, a shrine of quiet hope and painful memory. Alistair's geological maps remained pinned to the corkboard in his study, the colored markers showing the paths he would never take. His books were left open on his desk, their pages gathering dust like snow caught in a photograph. Elena knew she couldn't keep everything. It was too heavy a burden. Following the instructions in his will, she began the heart-wrenching task of packing up his life's work. She meticulously organized his field notes, his research papers, and hundreds of cataloged core samples into dozens of sealed, alphabetized boxes. They were donated to his alma mater, the University of Colorado Boulder, a legacy of a brilliant mind cut short. Among them was one box from his final obsessive project on the Blackwood Shale. Inside, nestled among mundane pieces of slate and granite, was a single, fist-sized sample of dark, vitreous rock. It was heavier than the others, with a strange, glassy sheen. It was labeled with a simple piece of masking tape in Alistair's neat, methodical script, SC B7 Finch Alpha. To the archivists who received it, it was just another rock, one of thousands in their collection. To Elena, it was a painful relic of a time when hope still existed, the last piece of the earth he had ever touched. For 35 years, it sat in a climate-controlled drawer in a vast university archive, a totem of memory whose true meaning lay dormant, waiting for technology to finally catch up to the secret it held. Hope, when it is buried long enough, can feel like a forgotten language. You can almost remember the shape of the words, but the sound is gone. For 35 years, the story of Alistair Finch was a story without hope. But the truth has a way of rising to the surface, and it often does so through the most unexpected means. The spark that reignited Alistair Finch's cold case came not from a determined detective or a deathbed confession, but from the quiet, academic curiosity of a student named Maya Renshaw in the spring of 2023. Maya was a graduate student at the University of Colorado Boulder, tasked with a project on the evolution of geochemical analysis techniques. She needed a historical case study, and she was granted access to the university's vast geological archives. She chose to focus on the work of Alistair Finch, a once respected alumnus whose name was now synonymous with tragic local folklore. For Maya, he wasn't a ghost. He was a scientist whose methods were frozen in time, a perfect subject for her research. She spent weeks in the dusty, temperature-controlled silence of the archives, digitizing his meticulous, hand-drawn maps and field notes. It was a slow, reverent process. She felt as if she were getting to know the man, tracing the lines of his pen, reading his observations on mineral deposits and fault lines. She could feel his passion, his almost poetic connection to the earth. One afternoon, looking for a sample to test her new spectrometry software on, she pulled out the cardboard box from his final project, the one simply labeled Blackwood Shale. She saw the oddly labeled rock immediately, SC.B7.Finch.Alpha. It was different from the others. While the rest were dull slate and granite, this one was denser, with an almost glassy sheen that caught the dim archive light. The label was stark against the dark surface. On a whim, driven more by a growing sense of connection to the long-dead geologist than any specific scientific hypothesis, she decided to use this one for her tests. It was an arbitrary choice, a small, seemingly insignificant decision made on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. But like a loose stone starting an avalanche, Maya Renshaw's simple act of academic curiosity was about to shatter 35 years of silence. She was about to give a dead man his voice back. The lab was quiet, filled only with the low, steady hum of machinery. Maya fed a small pulverized piece of sample SC.B7 Finch Alpha into the university's state-of-the-art mass spectrometer. The process was routine. She expected to see a familiar chemical signature on the monitor, quartz, feldspar, mica, the standard components of shale and granite that made up the entire region. It was a simple baseline test for her software. She started the analysis, her eyes scanning the data as it began to populate the screen. Then she stopped. Her breath caught in her chest. She ran the test again, and then a third time. The results that scrolled onto her screen made no sense. They were a chemical impossible. The rock contained all the expected elements of granite, but it was bound together by something else. A complex organometallic compound she had never seen before. A compound that did not exist in nature. It was, in the simplest terms, man-made. The machine software flagged it as an unknown contaminant, a foreign element that had somehow infiltrated the sample. But Maya, staring at the molecular diagram, knew it was more than that. This compound wasn't a contaminant on the rock.
It was the matrix of the rock itself. It wasn't an ingredient. It was the glue holding the entire thing together. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, settled over her. The kind of dread that comes with a piece of knowledge you can never unknow. This rock wasn't a natural formation. It was waste. Highly advanced, carefully engineered industrial waste, designed and disguised to look like stone. The forgery from Alistair's journal. It wasn't a metaphor for a geological anomaly. It was literal. He had found fake rocks. She stared at the screen, the blinking green cursor, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat in the silent lab. In that moment, the entire narrative of Alistair Finch's disappearance shifted. The story of a man lost to a tragic accident in the wilderness dissolved, replaced by a much darker, more terrifying reality. Alistair Finch hadn't been studying an anomaly of nature. He had found a tombstone. And the real question was no longer what happened to him, but how many other tombstones were out there, silent and waiting in the Colorado shale. Maya knew she couldn't go to the university authorities. Not yet. Not yet. The implications of her discovery were too vast, too monstrous. This was more than a research anomaly. It pointed to a crime, one that had been successfully hidden for over a generation. So she did the only thing she could think of. She found Elena Finch. Elena was a woman in her late 70s now, living in the same small house in Stone Creek, a house that still felt like it was holding its breath. Her eyes held the quiet, unshakable sorrow of a long and lonely winter. In Elena's sun-drenched living room, surrounded by towering shelves of books and the ghost of a life lived decades ago, Maya carefully laid out the spectrometry reports on the polished oak coffee table. She explained what they meant, her voice trembling slightly. As Elena listened, something shifted. For the first time in over 30 years, a flicker of something other than grief appeared in her eyes. A fierce, burning light. It was the return of the woman Alistair had married, the sharp-minded librarian who had debated scientific theories with him late into the night. The forgery he had written about in his journal wasn't a metaphor. He had found literal forgeries, fake rocks hiding a terrible secret. Every answer she had been given, every official report, every sympathetic glance from the town sheriff, all of it had been a lie. Armed with this impossible, damning evidence, Elena Finch did what she hadn't had the strength or the reason to do in decades. She fought back. Hope, she now realized, wasn't a passive feeling, it was an action. She used a portion of her modest savings to hire a private investigator, a retired Denver PD detective named Grant Kincaid. Kincaid was a man built of patience and skepticism, a specialist in cases so cold they were frozen solid. He was a quiet man who carried himself with an air of exhaustion, the kind that only comes from staring into the darkest parts of human nature for too long. He listened to Elena and Maya in his small, cluttered office, his face impassive as they told their incredible story. He looked at the lab reports. He read the entry from Alistair's journal. He agreed to look into it, but his eyes held a warning. Digging up the past, he told them, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, often meant burying the present. He had no idea how true that would prove to be. The seeker had found her skeptic, and together they were about to walk back into the silence that had swallowed Alistair Finch. Grant Kincaid began not by looking for Alistair, but by looking at the town of Stone Creek itself. A good investigator knows that a man's disappearance is never a contained event. It creates ripples, and if you watch those ripples long enough, they lead you back to the source. He spent weeks in the county records office, the air thick with the smell of old paper and forgotten stories.
He pulled property records, business licenses, and death certificates from the late 1980s. And slowly, a chilling pattern emerged from the dry, bureaucratic ink. In the 5 years surrounding Alistair's disappearance, from 1986 to 1991, 3 other men in the sparsely populated region had died in single-vehicle accidents on lonely, winding roads. A fourth, a local land surveyor named George Bell, had died of an extremely rare and aggressive form of neurological cancer at the age of 45. On their own, they were isolated tragedies, the kind of bad luck that happens in small, remote communities. But together, they formed a constellation of death. All 4 men had one thing in common. They had done contract work for Ethelred Industries, a powerful but secretive corporation that operated a geological research facility deep in the wilderness near the Blackwood Shale. The facility had been quietly decommissioned and abandoned in 1990, just 2 years after Alistair vanished. When Kincaid started asking questions around Stone Creek, he was met with a wall of polite, unyielding silence. People remembered Ethelred, of course they did. They remembered the good-paying jobs in a town that had few. They remembered the company men in their clean trucks and the way they kept to themselves. And they remembered the warnings, sometimes friendly, sometimes not, to stay away from the company's land. Kincaid would sit in the town's only diner, and conversations would stop when he walked in. The silence wasn't just about a missing geologist anymore. Every friendly but firm denial, every averted gaze, every quick change of subject, it was the sound of a town holding its breath, a community bound by a shared, unspoken fear. The fear was old, but it was still alive. And it had a name: Ethelred. Ethelred Industries in 2023 was a ghost of a different kind. It had rebranded itself, shedding its old skin like a snake. It was now a global leader in clean energy and sustainable technology, its corporate headquarters a gleaming glass and steel testament to environmental responsibility in downtown Denver. Its dark past in industrial manufacturing and chemical engineering was buried deep under layers of masterful public relations and greenwashing.
But Kincaid knew that you can't erase history just by changing your letterhead. Digging through declassified government contracts, he discovered that the geological research Ethelred was conducting in the 80s was a cover. They were a subcontractor for the Department of Defense, working on advanced material science, developing new alloys and composites for next-generation military hardware. The research was cutting edge, but it produced byproducts that were lethally toxic. Unofficially, Ethelred's most important contract was not for creating new materials, but for getting rid of the old ones. The synthetic polymer Maya had found, which Kincaid's contacts at the EPA codenamed hexavalerium-7 or HV7, was one of those byproducts. It was a material so carcinogenic, so persistent in the environment that there was no legal way to dispose of it. Burying it was not an option. It would leach into the soil. Incinerating it released neurotoxins into the air. So Ethelred, in a move of monstrous ingenuity, had developed a proprietary method to vitrify it, to encase the liquid chemical waste in a stable rock-like shell, and then dump thousands of these stones in the remote, unmonitored wilderness of the Blackwood Shale. They weren't just polluting the land, they were building a counterfeit mountain range out of poison. Alistair Finch, with his obsessive search for geological echoes, with his uncanny ability to sense when the Earth was out of tune, had stumbled upon the largest and most audacious illegal toxic waste dump in American history. He wasn't a victim of the wilderness, he was a threat. A single man who held a truth that could bring a billion-dollar corporation to its knees.
And in the cold calculus of corporate risk management, a threat like that doesn't just need to be silenced, it needs to be erased. The label on the rock, SC-B7 Finch.Alpha, gnawed at Kincaid. It was the one piece of evidence that came directly from Alistair himself, a message in a bottle thrown into the ocean of time. It felt too specific, too deliberate to be a simple catalog number. Alistair Finch was a meticulous man. He wouldn't have been careless with his final discovery. He was trying to say something. Kincaid, Elena, and Maya spent long nights in Elena's living room, which had now become their informal headquarters. The air was thick with the smell of old books and fresh coffee. They spread Alistair's faded maps and dusty journals across the big oak table, poring over every line, searching for a corresponding code, a key that would unlock the message. Every theory led to a dead end. Every answer was like a knife made of fog. You could feel the edge, but you couldn't see it. The breakthrough came from Elena. It came on a cold, rainy night as she was quietly looking through a box of Alistair's personal books, not his geology texts, but his passions. She remembered Alistair had a private hobby, a love for cryptography and ancient cartography. He believed modern science had lost the art of embedding meaning into maps. Her fingers brushed against a thin, leather-bound notebook. Inside, she found his personal cipher keys. And then she saw it. SC, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It's not Stone Creek. Kincaid and Maya looked up. It's sub-coordinata. It was his term, from Latin. He used it for precise location markers on his personal maps, markers that went beyond the standard grid. B7, Kincaid realized, grabbing an old topographical map of the Blackwood Shale, is a grid reference. His finger traced the lines until it landed on a desolate square of land. Finch, Maya added, was his signature. He was signing his work. And Alpha? That was the key. In his cryptography notes, Alpha was his designation for a primary discovery site, the origin point,
The first and most important finding. The label wasn't just an identifier. It was a message from the past, a desperate, brilliant message. It was a set of coordinates pointing to a specific, isolated spot deep within the territory Athelred had once controlled, a place where, according to every official record, nothing had ever been built. Alistair hadn't just left behind a rock, he had left them a map to his own grave. Following the coordinates from Alistair's cryptic message led Kincaid and a small, trusted team to a collapsed ravine deep within the Athelred territory. It was a place designed to be forgotten, overgrown with 35 years of thorny brush and resilient aspen trees. Nature had done its best to reclaim the land, to pull a green blanket over a deep scar. But under the debris, after hours of painstaking work, Kincaid found what he was looking for. A solid steel plate, thick and rusted, crudely welded over the entrance to an old, unmarked mine shaft. There was no record of this mine on any geological survey or county map. It didn't officially exist. This was a place off the books, a place for secrets. The air grew heavy, thick with a sense of grim anticipation. Using a portable ground-penetrating radar unit, a tool Alistair himself would have marveled at, they began to scan the earth behind the steel plate. The mood shifted from investigative to something more akin to a seance. They were trying to speak to the dead, and the GPR was their medium. The image that slowly resolved on the small glowing screen was ghostly and undeniable. 30 feet into the sealed tunnel, the radar detected a large, dense metal object, a mining cart. Inside the cart, the scanner picked up the distinct density and shape of human skeletal remains, surrounded by the fainter outlines of what looked like scientific equipment and a heavy waterproof case. After 30 years,
5 years of silence, Alistair Finch had finally been found. There was no relief in that moment, only a profound and heavy sadness. The wilderness hadn't taken him. The cold hadn't claimed him. He hadn't fallen. He had been put here. He had been exactly where he had told them he would be, sealed in a tomb of rock and steel, waiting. The mapmaker had become a permanent part of the map, his final resting place marked only by a code he hoped someone, someday, would be clever and caring enough to break. Getting permission to cut open the mine was a protracted legal battle. Athelred's army of lawyers argued that the land was private property, that the GPR data was inconclusive, that it was a desecration of a fragile ecosystem. But Elena Finch, armed with Kincaid's meticulous evidence and the burning righteousness of a woman who had waited 35 years for an answer, was relentless. She would not be silenced again. When the court order finally came through, the day was overcast and cold, the gray sky pressing down on the mountains. When the plasma torch finally sliced through the last of the rusted steel plate, the air that escaped from the tomb was cold and stale, carrying the ancient scent of damp earth and time itself. The scene inside was perfectly preserved, a tableau of a crime frozen for decades by the dark and the cold. Alistair Finch's remains were in the cart, just as the GPR had shown. His rock hammer, the one he had used to unlock the Earth's secrets, lay beside him. But the most important discovery, the one that would make his voice heard across the decades, was a heavy-duty, waterproof pelican case tucked under his body. Inside, his final field journal and a dozen more carefully labeled samples were pristine, protected from the slow decay of the years. His last entry was written in a shaky but resolute hand, dated October 12, 1988. It was not a plea for help,
but a final damning report, a last testament from a man who knew he was about to die, but was determined not to die in vain. It read, "They know I'm here. Followed me from the access road. It wasn't an echo. It was a leak. The entire aquifer is compromised. The company is Ethelred. They are poisoning the valley. I've mapped the plume. The evidence is in this case. My name is Dr. Alistair Finch. Make sure they know." He had spent his life listening to the earth, and in his final moments, he gave the earth his voice. Alistair's journal was the weapon they needed, a voice from a steel tomb. It detailed with chilling scientific precision how he had discovered that Ethelred wasn't just dumping vitrified waste. They were actively pumping liquid HV7 directly into the abandoned mine shaft, letting it leach directly into the region's groundwater. The echo he had been chasing wasn't a magnetic anomaly. It was the poison spreading through the Earth's veins. He had been ambushed at the mine entrance by two men. He recognized one of them. The name he wrote down, his pen pressing hard into the page, was Marcus Thorne, Ethelred's former head of security. The name hit Kincaid like a physical blow, because Marcus Thorne was not some shadowy figure from the past. He was a beloved pillar of the Stone Creek community, a wealthy retiree who sat on the town council and donated generously to the local high school and volunteer fire department. He was the man who handed out candy on Halloween and sponsored the Little League team. Monsters aren't just found in basements. Sometimes they live in kitchens. Sometimes they are your neighbors. When Kincaid and state investigators, armed with a warrant, confronted Thorne at his sprawling ranch, the pillar of the community crumbled into dust. Under the harsh glare of interrogation lights, the polite, grandfatherly facade dissolved. He confessed everything. Alistair Finch had confronted him and his partner at the mine, holding up a water sample, his face a mask of cold fury. There was an argument, a struggle.
Thorne, acting on standing orders from Ethelred's board to contain any breach of security by any means necessary, had bludgeoned the geologist with his own rock hammer, placed his body and his damning evidence in a cart, and sealed him in the mine forever. The other accidents and the surveyor's sudden cancer, all loose ends he had quietly and efficiently tied up for the company. He wasn't just a killer, he was a corporate executioner. He was the architect of a 30.5-year silence, a silence he had maintained with a friendly smile and a firm handshake. The arrest of Marcus Thorne and the explosive evidence from Alistair's case blew the lid off Ethelred Industries. The subsequent state and federal investigation led to one of the largest corporate manslaughter and environmental crime cases in American history. The carefully crafted facade of the new Ethelred shattered, revealing the rot that had festered for decades. Executives were indicted. The company was forced into a multi-billion-dollar settlement to fund the cleanup of Stone Creek's water supply and provide lifetime health care for the generations of residents who had been unknowingly poisoned by the water flowing from their taps. Alistair Finch was no longer a ghost story whispered on the wind. He was a hero. His name was given to a new water research institute at the University of Colorado, a place dedicated to the kind of uncompromising truth he had died for. And in the main hall of the geology department, encased in thick, climate-controlled glass, sits a single dark rock.
sample SC-B7 Finch Alpha. The totem of memory had become a symbol of justice. The truth, like water, had finally found its way to the surface. It had taken decades of pain, the spark of a student's curiosity, and the unwavering hope of one woman who refused to let her husband's echo fade into silence. Justice had been served, but it had come late, carved from stone and sorrow. It was a final, haunting testament to the man who read the Earth's warnings and gave his life to make sure someone else would hear them. Do you think a secret this large could be kept today? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Because of you, his name will not be forgotten. Thank you for watching Deep End Stories. The story of Alistair Finch is a powerful reminder that the most important truths are often the most deeply buried, and that the courage of one person can be enough to move mountains. If you believe that no name should stay forgotten, don't forget to subscribe to Deep End Stories and hit the notification bell. Well, we'll see you in the next mystery.